At 40, Casey Stoner finally reveals the 5 riders he feared the most. Casey Stoner walked away from motorcycle racing at 27, 2 world championships, millions of dollars left on the table, and a silence that lasted years. But at 40, the man who terrified every rider on the grid has finally admitted something nobody expected. There were 5 riders who made him feel fear, and one of them nearly broke him completely. Casey Stoner was different from every champion before him. Born in Southport, Australia. In 1985, his family sold everything and moved to England when he was 14, just so he could race. No money, no connections. Just a kid who could do things on a motorcycle that engineers couldn't explain. He won the 2007 MotoGP championship on a Ducati that nobody else could ride. Then moved to Honda and won again in 2011. 2 titles, 2 different machines. And then he vanished. Walked away at 27 while rivals twice his age were still fighting for scraps. That's who feared these 5 men. Number 5, Loris Capirossi, the Italian veteran who most fans overlook when they talk about legends. But Stoner never overlooked him. When Stoner arrived at Ducati in 2007, Capirossi was already there. 34 years old, battle-scarred, missing the tip of a finger from a racing accident, and faster than any man his age had a right to be. Capirossi wasn't afraid of the Ducati Desmosedici. That bike was a beast that spat off every rider who tried to tame it. But Capirossi had been riding it for years and knew its secrets. In those early days at Ducati, Stoner watched Capirossi closely. He studied his data. He watched how the Italian managed the rear tire in ways that made no sense on paper, but worked on track. And Capirossi never held back information. He could have made life difficult for the young Australian. Instead, he raced him clean and pushed him hard. Stoner admitted that Capirossi's raw experience frightened him, not because of speed, but because Capirossi had survived things on a motorcycle that would have sent most men into retirement. That kind of survival creates a rider with nothing left to lose, and nothing is more dangerous than a man with nothing left to lose. Number 4, Dani Pedrosa, the smallest man on the grid with the biggest talent nobody fully appreciated. Pedrosa stood 5'2" and weighed barely 50 kilograms. He looked like a child next to the other riders. But on a Honda, he was surgical. Clean lines, perfect braking, 0 wasted movement. And Stoner feared that precision because you couldn't rattle Pedrosa. You couldn't intimidate him with aggression. You couldn't bully him into a mistake. He just kept coming, lap after lap, silent, consistent, deadly. When Stoner moved to Honda in 2011, Pedrosa became his teammate. And that's when the fear became personal. Because in the same garage, on the same bike, with the same engineers, Pedrosa was sometimes faster. Not always, but enough times to make Stoner question himself. And for a rider whose mental health was already fragile, that doubt was poison. Stoner once said that the riders who scared him most were the ones who never showed emotion. Pedrosa never showed anything. He just rode. And that silence kept Stoner awake at night more than any overtake ever could. Number 3, Jorge Lorenzo, the Spaniard with the ego of a king and the consistency of a machine. Lorenzo didn't have Stoner's natural ability. He didn't have that wild, God-given connection with a motorcycle, but he had something Stoner secretly envied: discipline. Lorenzo could ride 40 laps at the exact same pace, not a tenth of a second difference. Every corner, every braking point, every exit, identical. And that robotic consistency terrified Stoner because it meant Lorenzo didn't make mistakes. You couldn't wait for him to crack. He never cracked. In 2008 and 2009, Lorenzo and Stoner fought battles where Stoner was visibly faster, but Lorenzo would still win because he never lost concentration. Not once. Stoner admitted that racing Lorenzo felt like fighting a wall. You could hit it as hard as you wanted, and it wouldn't move. And the mental toll of that was worse than any physical pain. Lorenzo didn't need to scare you with aggression. He scared you by being perfect. And perfection, when you're battling your own mind every single weekend, is the most terrifying opponent of all. But the last two names on this list aren't just riders who scared Casey Stoner. They're the two who haunted him long after he hung up his leathers. Number 2, Marc Marquez, the kid from Cervera who arrived in MotoGP in 2013 and immediately made every champion on the grid feel old. Stoner had already retired by then, but he watched, and what he saw terrified him in a way no active rival ever had, because Marquez rode exactly like Stoner. The same sliding style, the same impossible saves, the same ability to push a motorcycle past its limits and somehow bring it back. But Marquez did it younger, faster, and with a fearlessness that made even Stoner's wildest rides look cautious. Stoner worked with Honda as a test rider after retirement and saw Marquez up close. He saw the data, he saw the corner speeds, and he admitted something that must have burned his soul. Marquez was doing things on a motorcycle that Stoner couldn't do. Couldn't do. For a man who walked away believing he was the most talented rider of his generation, watching a 20-year-old prove him wrong was a different kind of fear. Not fear of crashing, not fear of losing, fear of being forgotten. Fear that everything he sacrificed his mental health for would be erased by a kid who smiled while doing it. Stoner never said it publicly with those words, but the way he spoke about Marquez carried a weight that interviews couldn't hide. Marquez wasn't just the future. He was proof that the sport didn't need Casey Stoner anymore, and that haunted him. Number 1, Valentino Rossi. And this one cuts the deepest. Rossi didn't just scare Stoner on the track. He scared him in ways that went far beyond racing. When Stoner was winning the 2007 championship, Rossi was struggling on the Yamaha. But Rossi didn't fight Stoner with speed that year. He fought him with words, mind games, press conference jabs, that famous smile that said, "I don't take you seriously." And it worked, because Stoner couldn't handle it. He was a quiet kid from Australia who let his riding speak, but Rossi controlled the entire paddock with personality. The media loved Rossi. The fans loved Rossi. Even when Stoner was faster, the cameras pointed at Rossi, and that psychological warfare ate Stoner alive. The Laguna Seca battle in 2008 became the moment that defined everything. That Rossi overtook Stoner with a move that was barely legal, ran off track, and the world celebrated Rossi's genius while Stoner screamed about respect. Nobody listened. That night, Stoner couldn't sleep, not because he lost a race, because he realized the sport would never love him the way it loved Rossi. And for a man already battling chronic fatigue and anxiety, that rejection was the beginning of the end. Rossi didn't just beat Casey Stoner. He made him question why he was racing at all. And at 40 years old, Stoner still hasn't fully answered that question. Casey Stoner didn't retire because his body broke. He retired because his mind had enough. 2 world championships, 38 victories, and 5 riders who left scars no trophy could heal. Capirossi taught him survival. Pedrosa taught him doubt. Lorenzo taught him perfection. Marquez taught him irrelevance. And Rossi taught him the cruelest lesson of all. Some battles you can never win. Subscribe for more untold racing stories.